Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with a Booktube tag today. It is also the first book-related video I've done in quite some time, so I'm excited to be able to share it with you today. This is a tag that I first came across on Candy's channel over at The Great Literary Rabbit Hole. I will link Candy's video in the description box below. It's a tag that was created by Hannah of Hannah's Books. I will link Hannah's original video in the description box below as well. I will also timestamp the questions. This tag is the reading shifts tag. So it's all about how our reading has changed over the course of our life as readers, or how, different life circumstances or situations may have changed our reading habits at different times, how our tastes and preferences have changed, and so on. And I really like this tag because I feel like it includes a lot of questions that I've never really answered anywhere else. I feel like it's an interesting theme for a tag and one that invites sharing a lot about our reading practices that we don't necessarily talk about all the time. So I was happy to find it. The first question is, how has your reading developed over your lifetime? Do the kind of books that bring you the most pleasure now differ from the books you loved most earlier in your life? If you've seen big changes in your reading since you've matured, what might explain your changing interests? So I started reading very young, and I have loved reading for pretty much my entire life. My mom was a stay-at-home parent, and I'm the oldest, and we spent a lot of time reading together, even before I started kindergarten as a 4-year-old. She was instilling in me a love of books. So I've always been a reader. Of course, as a child, I was first reading children's books, and now I read adult books. But other than that, I would say there are some lines of continuity throughout my reading life in terms of the kinds of fiction that bring me the most pleasure. I feel like I have always gravitated toward the speculative. I read very predominantly science fiction and fantasy with some horror at times. I'm interested in better learning what I like when it comes to horror books, but these have always been the genres that I've been most interested in, both as a child and as an adult. I was taking, Anne Rice books out of the public library, much to my mother's dismay, actually, as a, very early teenager or young teenager. And so genre-wise, I think I've been, if anything, relatively consistent. I've, of course, read outside of these genres, but they've always been my passion. In terms of nonfiction, I would say that I've seen bigger changes in my reading. And that has just had to do with how my interests have changed as I've gone through different periods and stages in my life. There was a point as a teenager where I was really interested in nonfiction books about music, so kind of musicians' autobiographies and things like that, music history kinds of books. I haven't read too many of those super recently, but there was definitely a time where that was really my nonfiction go-to. When I was in school, I was reading a lot of philosophy, very predominantly in terms of my nonfiction reading. I am a practicing druid and have been for a number of years now, and so have spent the last several years reading more nature-related books and ecology-related books and books related to nature spirituality, magical practice, and things like this, in ways that in my earlier life I read a lot less of, or didn't read in such a directed way. So I'd say, that the shifts in my reading have been more so in the area of nonfiction and have really just been reflections of what I've been interested in at any given time. The second set of questions are: do you find yourself choosing different kinds of books at different periods of the year? For example, do the seasons affect what you read for pleasure? Similarly, might you read very different kinds of books while on vacation? I would not say that the seasons impact my reading overall. In terms of the types of books that I like to read, I tend to read the same kinds of books year round, with perhaps the exception of spooky October. I am not the biggest horror reader. I'm getting more interested in horror gradually, but it's not the main genre I read, and I do have a tendency to save up the titles that I find that I'm interested in until the autumn rolls around, and particularly October, spooky season, and I read lots of horror at that time. So that is one way that I would say that the seasons affect what I read. Beyond that, I would say not too much. I have occasionally run into situations where a very particular book feels like it should be read at a certain time. So for example, Moon of the Crusted Snow by Waukesha Grice, which was a book that I absolutely loved. That book, reading it during the winter when, the landscape that I live in is buried in snow, was very much the right choice. And I think that reading Moon of the Crusted Snow, which is set in a very, wintry and cold setting, reading that on a beach would have felt weird. So, occasionally something like that will come up where a particular book seems to want to be read in a particular season by me, but overall I would say I read pretty consistently year round, actually. Question number 3 is, do specific experiences in your life ever shape what you choose to read? For example, did you read obsessively about child rearing when your kids were little, about gardening as spring is about to begin, about the experience of grief when someone you loved passed, etc.? I would say that occasionally I will become very interested in a particular thing and therefore read lots about it. When I first became interested in learning some skills around photography, nature photography in particular, that really made me want to read books about photography, right? It wasn't that there was necessarily a particular life experience that prompted that, so much as just really finding an interest and latching onto it and wanting to learn as much about it as I could. I tend to want to learn as much about things as I can when I, develop a particular kind of interest or curiosity, so there have been different things in my life like that where I've kind of amassed a stack of and read through a stack of books on a particular topic just based on interest. I was in university full-time, completing an undergraduate degree and then in grad school from 2005 to 2016. So definitely that specific experience of being a student and of conducting research very much shaped my reading for those years of my life. I was, of course, reading nonfiction in my fields of study, which were politics, philosophy, cultural studies, and didn't have necessarily a ton of capacity to be reading other things beyond that, as much as I might have liked to be. So that very much shaped my reading at that time. Question number 4 is, have there been any times in your life when circumstances have limited or changed your reading in some way? Perhaps caretaking responsibilities, or a big move that made it hard to find as much time to read as you'd like, or personal illness that made it harder to concentrate, or maybe just long-term travel that might have limited your book choices. How do you deal with those circumstances? So I previously mentioned being in university for quite a long time. So from 2009 to 2016 was graduate school for me. That was a time when I really felt very little capacity to read anything other than what I was working on. particularly so when I spent some time doing archival research. So I actually traveled to another city and lived there for about 3 months and spent my days on the microfilm machine reading old newspapers and pamphlets and taking lots of notes and scans and photos and so on, and going home and trying to synthesize these things and think through them and, you know, analyze them and so on. Doing that kind of work very much took all of the brain space that I had at the time. So it definitely really focused my reading on a particular area. I would say similarly, immediately post-graduation, or kind of technically a bit before graduation, before I defended my doctoral thesis, I started teaching, and I was commuting between a couple of different universities and teaching a couple of different classes. And, you know, I started that in the September of 2016, which was also when I defended my doctoral thesis. And at that time, I was, of course, reading a lot in terms of, you know, grading lots of papers and reading to prepare for, you know, the classes that I was facilitating and designing syllabi and all of these kinds of things. And that was a huge shift professionally. And I really just could not focus on much else than the very predominantly non-fiction reading involved in that kind of work. So those are what come to mind for that question. Question number 5. Booktube is full of discussions of reading slumps, when dedicated readers seem to lose interest for a while in books. Sometimes they just can't find a book that appeals to them. Have you ever experienced a slump? If so, how did you handle it? If not, do you have any advice to give people who are experiencing slumps? I have experienced reading slumps really only in the sense of having times where I have not had the time, not had the capacity, or not had the wellness that allow me to read that support my reading. I've never had a reading slump in terms of just lack of interest or not being able to find something that I want to read. If anything, I'm in a perpetual state of the opposite. I feel like there are so many things that interest me. There are so many books that I want to read in so many different areas, so many authors, you know, whose work I would like to experience. There's just no shortage of books that interest me. So I've never really had that experience of not finding anything that I wanted to read. I've absolutely had points where I've been sick and, you know, been doing a lot of sleeping, and so not, you know, been reading for that reason. I definitely had a reading slump this time last year when I was, you know, going through and grieving a loss in my household, and didn't read for a time there. But again, it wasn't out of lack of interest in books or lack of interesting books on my shelf to pick from. It was just being so overwhelmed with emotion that I did not have it in me to read. I couldn't really focus in that way. It wasn't super long-lived in terms of that slump, but I was taking care of myself. I was taking care of myself and I was taking care of my family. And so reading was not my focus at that time. Do I have any advice to give people experiencing a reading slump? I would say to just check in with yourself and, you know, check in with what you want, check in with what you need, consider why that slump might be something that you're experiencing. I feel like with things like this, there can be a rush to try to fix things, you know. If reading is a joy, that if all of a sudden you're in a slump, it's like, oh, something must be horrifyingly wrong. I really need to fix this. I need to get out of it. How do I get out of it? And I think that resisting that a little bit and checking in, you know, is always worth doing, because it may be that something in your life just is such that you need a break. It may be that reading isn't calling to you because you've found some other new hobby or interest that is all you can think about and is the thing that you want to spend your time on, and that means that the hobby of reading is receding into the background a little bit for a little while, and that can be completely okay, right? It may be that other demands in your life or health factors or things like that are needing attention. And so that attention that might have gone to reading at other times needs to be redirected somewhere else. And that could be fine too. So yeah, really just checking in with yourself is the only advice that I can give, because I think how to approach a potential reading slump is so dependent on the context and the cause and the person that it's hard to give any kind of advice that feels generalizable. The sixth question is, Booktubers also talk about book hangovers, when readers are so moved by a book that they find it difficult to move on to a new book. Have you ever felt this way? No. No, I've never felt like that. When I have finished a book that I found really impactful for whatever reason, you know, I've found myself wanting to talk about it, wanting to tell other people about it, wanting to make a video about it, wanting to, you know, text a friend and tell them, hey, you know, this book's where it's at. This is a thing that you should look at, you know, based on your overlapping book preferences with mine or things like that. I definitely have felt like, oh, I want to talk about it, but I've never felt like I didn't want to start reading something new. If anything, in those kind of moments, I feel so ignited as a reader that I want to read another book. I might take a day, you know, to think about the book that I've read and sit with it, or, you know, maybe make some notes depending on the kind of book that it is. But I've never felt nudged into some sort of slump because I was so affected by a book. I've just felt really happy to be a reader in those moments. The last question, question 7, is, tell us about a few books that almost always work for you. Something that might have remained a favorite throughout your life, despite any changing reading tastes. Something that always seems to hit just the right spot when you need a lift, or perhaps some lifetime book hangover where the text will always be in the back of your mind. This is the question that I struggle with the most in this list. I didn't overplan my answers too much. I gave all the questions a quick skim. This is the one that I spent the most time thinking about before I turned my camera on to start filming. And the reason for that is that I am really not a big rereader. I've definitely reread books before. I've, revisited texts at different times in my life, for sure. Of course, when I'm, teaching or researching, there are books that I've read multiple times in that context. In terms of fiction that I enjoy, I'm really not a big rereader. So to try to think about a book that always seems to hit the right spot is a tricky one for me. I can easily think of authors whose work tends to always work for me. Like if I'm just not maybe sure what I want to read next, but I know I want to read something. I just want to read something that I know I'm going to like. There are authors like Adrian Tchaikovsky or P. Jelly Clark or Martha Wells whose work I know I will like, at least thus far. But individual titles is hard. I did find some because I wanted to show something. I would say something that has remained a favorite or in the back of my mind for sure, and I suspect this is one that I'm not alone in saying this about, would be Le Petit Prince, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This is a very special book. This book was first given to me by a friend in high school, and it was given to me in English. So I have both, the English and the original French. And she gifted it to me, and I had been unfamiliar with it prior, and I found it very impactful when I read it. And it is one that I have revisited multiple times, and it's one that if I'm not feeling the greatest, I know that I can take off the shelf and maybe not even read the whole thing, but I can find something there to, to read and find something meaningful in. That's definitely one that always works for me. Another perpetual favorite, I would say, is Undrowned: Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. This book is beautiful. I got this book when it came out 2020. And this is a book that I have purchased possibly more times than any other book, because I will get it and I will end up giving it away. And then I will buy it again because I want to have it, and then I will end up giving it away. And this has happened 2 or 3 times. This book is bibliomancy. You can just go to a page and find something, something amazing there. Alexis Pauline Gumbs is a poet. She also has a beautiful book about Audre Lorde, which I would also recommend. I've only read that one once. This one I've read a few times. So that's a very special one. I would say Emma Goldman's autobiography, Living My Life. This is volume 1 of 2, so it's a lengthy one. I have read this multiple times. I have engaged with this personally. I've engaged with this academically, in a number of different contexts. I have learned a lot from this book. I continue to learn a lot from this book. I first read this in high school, and I cannot for the life of me remember why this came to me in high school. I read her book of essays first, and my copy is destroyed, as you would expect. High school was quite a long time ago. And from that, I found this, and this book has been a life changer for me, for sure. That is a very special book as well. And finally, the last one I'll mention is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Again, one that I highly doubt I would be the only person to mention. I have not reread this book in its totality, but there are chapters in this book that I have reread multiple times and that I have revisited at different points when, I have felt like I needed to read this book. I think this book is really special as well. Very highly recommend. Absolutely in the back of my mind in different ways, ongoingly since I read it for the first time. So the 8th prompt is to tag people, and I will just say, if you haven't done this tag before and you're interested in making a VR, consider yourself tagged. Please do feel free to share with me in the comments below any of your answers to these prompts, especially if you're someone who loves to watch Booktube but doesn't make videos yourself. Please do feel welcome to participate by sharing. Do you love any of the same books as I? Do we have some shared reading experiences or some different ones? I would love to know. I love, of course, talking about books and reading. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.